All right, we will continue now with the next session. Now, there will be another plenary session titled Service Learning After the Pandemic, a way to re-include and give meaning to education again. These are the speakers: Álvaro Ugueño from the Ibero-American Service Learning Network, Roberto Gonzalez from Technical School number 4 in Junín de los Andes, Argentina, Selmira May from UNESCO in Latin America, and we would like to thank Olia Mikhaileshin for being here from the Catholic University of Ukraine. The moderator in this panel will be Enrique Ochoa, Executive Director of CLAYSS. So he will have the floor now. Thank you. When we decided to put together an agenda and the plenary sessions for the 2 mornings of the conference, it was unavoidable for us to talk about the impact of the pandemic on schools and what would happen after the pandemic. A lot has been said already. I don't want to repeat everything that we have said. Whenever we deal with this kind of situation, a very extraordinary situation at the global level, unfortunately, we lost many people. We had a lot of suffering and pain. But as we said yesterday, there are many institutions that converted that into strength. They rethought how to give new meaning to education. So we thought about having a plenary session on service learning during and after the pandemic as a way of revisiting many of our practices. So we decided to invite a teacher from an Argentine school that has been engaged in projects that have been strengthened during the pandemic. We wanted to have a university experience. That is why we have Olia from the Catholic University of Ukraine. We also wanted to tell you about a survey that the Ibero-American Service Learning Network did about experiences during the pandemic, and Álvaro is going to talk about that. And we also wanted to invite Selmira, a UNESCO expert, to share her view from an academic and educational standpoint about this process. So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Álvaro Ugueño Novoa, who has coordinated different teams in secondary schools and universities. He has been a secretary of the Seferino Namuncurá organization in the state of Temuco. He's the executive secretary of a network in Chile. He is an active member and founder of the Service Learning Network in Chile. He's a member of the Ibero-American Service Learning Network, and he's also part of the magazine, and he has been responsible for compiling all the practices that took place during the pandemic. Álvaro, you have 15 minutes. When we come to the minute number 12, I will give you a signal, and let's try to stick to the time allotted. Okay? Hello, good morning to you all. I want to especially thank the organizers of this seminar for being here, for allowing me to be here. I want to greet my fellow panelists, especially Olia. You are very brave to be here. As Kike said it, I was specially invited because in April of this year, in line with one of the commitments undertaken by the Ibero-American Network, we decided to compile experiences from different countries during the pandemic. So we were able to apply a methodology together with Luz Abruch, who must be somewhere. Maybe she can stand up. You can see her at the back. With her, we worked and we decided to convene a certain number of people. I will divide my presentation into 3 sections. During the first one, I'm going to talk about the methodology. Then, I'm going to share with you some specific features that we identified, and then I'm going to refer to some challenges. As Kike said, I'm not going to talk about the pandemic and its impact, its effects, because that is something that is well known by all of us. But I am a representative of a group of people who work in this area. I was invited to share this information here, but one of the first elements that we discover has to do with our methodology. We invited a number of people to participate using gender criteria, schools, universities, and civil society organizations and community organizations. So we invited them to answer a couple of simple questions. We also used as a reference some excerpts from a book written by Humberto Maturana together with Aguila that is called the Reflexive Revolution. He wrote that before he died during the pandemic. So in that book, he asks us to reflect on how we can revisit our relations, our human relations in the context of the pandemic. So we had a meeting to have an internal discussion. And each of the groups convened shared their experiences. But before telling you about these people, let me also say that we know that we live in an uncertain, crazy world, but the pandemic made it clear that that was the case. Secondly, we realized that in all levels of education, in terms of public policy in education, although we were in a pandemic, the ministries of education at different levels reinforced the need to improve the quality of education. Although we might think that the quality was going to worsen, in many countries, they tried to work to improve the quality of education. This was highly valued, but of course, they were under a lot of pressure. Then, social innovation in teaching made sense, but we had to be brave enough to go forward in that direction because the circumstances were dynamically changing. So, we found or defined 3 main pillars or central themes. In the pandemic, we discovered that in Latin American countries, inequalities and gaps, social gaps, were huge. Not only in terms of connectivity, access to technology, but also because there were many differences between schools in the middle of the city vis-a-vis schools in rural areas, and the same happened to universities in the periphery or in the north of the country or in other parts of the country. So we talked a lot about these inequalities. Another element that was recurrent in the statements made by the invited groups was that the democracy seemed to be quite fragile. The different stakeholders could have different levels of participation in different parts of the educational system. Therefore, there was a high pressure to have quality education, but in terms of participation, the situation was not that clear. So, it was said that education had to be revisited because the pandemic was showing increasing inequalities. And we identified an interesting element in this process. That was that we discovered that educational models in most schools and universities were still quite monocultural. That is, there was no epistemic pluralism that could show an exchange of knowledge in these institutions. So, the pandemic made it clear that there are different types of knowledge and that the family, the community, the neighborhood have their own knowledge, and there should be a more powerful dialogue taking place with them. So, this was something that needed to change in educational models. So, against this background, we were able to put together a frequency table. And let me mention a few participants. Sergio Rial from Argentina, as a representative of the Ministry of Education, Camila Almada from the University of Buenos Aires. I know that on Tuesday we talked about this experience on nutrition. Two colleagues from Brazil, Ana Sofia Carvalho and Isabela Alcorne. I would say that most of them are here, right? They can stand up. Yes, I was going to ask them if they want to stand up so that everybody can see their faces. Esteban Mena from the Marist Schools, Carlos Corrales from Ecuador, Elsa Elena from Mexico, from the Service Learning Network there, Montserrat Santana and Silvia Bocci from Uruguay. So, if you're here, please stand up so that everybody can see you. Esteban, Carlos. Sergio is at the back of the room. I don't know whether Isabella is there. Yes, we have several of them here. They are the leaders of this work because they shared their experience. I'm not going to tell you here what they said. I'm going to talk about the challenges and interpretations because this will be reflected in a publication that is now being processed and will be launched soon. So we put together a frequency table, and this is what I'm going to show you. The first thing that we discovered was that there were three conceptual pillars here that later on would enable us to identify 7 major challenges. With these service learning experiences during the pandemic, in a setting that was uncertain, that made us vulnerable, and where there was a lack of hope, we realized that bringing together service learning with a human rights approach and multiple diversities in the territories was something very important. Something that we already knew, but ultimately, when you saw some governments that were ambivalent in their decisions, they demanded a lot of things, but they didn't provide the necessary resources in this difficult context of the pandemic. So we realized that a human rights approach and talking about cultural diversity within the framework of service learning was very important. All the countries in their experiences in schools and universities reinforced the idea that service learning has to be updated because that has always been a need. It has to be updated as a transformative pedagogy. And at certain points, schools and universities tend to avoid the political aspects. And here I'm not talking about political parties. I'm talking about understanding that service learning probes into different ways of understanding the social issues under certain governance circumstances, things that perhaps were not that clear before to us. So, we saw that in certain schools they continued to do service learning in a virtual format, that students were able to connect with the community, doing community diagnosis, using mobile devices for that. The teachers were able to do reflection across the board and using fora, different discussion fora, for instance. And you will see that in the publication that we are going to launch. But service learning emerges as a transformative pedagogy that tries to overcome the gaps that our countries may have in their systems, especially in Latin America, where we have so much fragmentation and so much inequality. And in that connection, many of the colleagues there reflected on the fact that democracies and territories had to be approached from the point of view of inclusion. Inclusion to make sure that more people could reach schools and universities, but also inclusion in terms of a human rights approach, with a genuine intervention in the society where children, youth, and adults participating in different levels of the education system can establish a special relationship, a horizontal relationship that will enable them to work collectively to operationalize some mechanisms in the society. We never thought that we were going to deal with a pandemic, so we had to reinvent ourselves in many ways. Okay, I only have 2 minutes left. Okay. So, I have already talked about some of these things. These are the major challenges that we identified. First, the need to look again and revisit the way of approaching service learning in adverse contexts. This has to do with relationships, to think about the real needs and the needs that are felt. The second challenge has to do with appreciating technologies. I think that all of us realize that at the beginning we saw technologies as a threat, but now we have a different view on them. And we also have to think how service learning updates its paradigm of execution through the use of technologies. More importantly, technologies that relate to the felt needs in the territories. I mean by this, listening to the voices that sometimes are unheard. And this is a personal comment that you will also see in that publication, and that is that sometimes we also tend to emphasize certain needs of the community. During the pandemic, we realized that we had to discuss the most profound aspects, and oftentimes what the school or the university thought that was the answer to a problem perhaps wasn't so. So one of the big reflections was that we need to work on community diagnosis, thinking about the needs felt by the community. We also need to establish strategic partnerships with the territories. So this is a valuable aspect, how we can establish partnerships with important partners in areas that have more needs. The fourth challenge, how to make educational curricula more flexible in this context. not just to talk about quality standards that are imposed on us by accreditation systems. Of course, we need them, and of course, we need to take them seriously. But when dealing with standards, with quality standards, we need to take into account that the relationship with the environment is especially important to see how we use methodologies like service learning to transform the society, to make a genuine contribution to the community, and to educate in human rights with a cultural relevance, which I think that is a major challenge. And finally, to revisit the formats. All of us know that we have many manuals available on service learning. I hope that the different units in schools and universities can read the work that we have done, which is not yet published, because we talk about incorporating certain new design elements into the projects. As I was telling you, to include human rights approach, the cultural identities, reciprocity of knowledge, fostering intercultural practices, because we talk a lot about these today, but we need to value all of them as important elements. They can make a significant contribution to service learning. Latin America is rich in natural resources and in human resources, but it is still lacking spaces that should be more fair, that should be fairer and should have more social justice. Thank you, Álvaro. Now we'll move on to Roberto Gonzalez, who comes from the south of the country. He comes from a school in Junín de los Andes in the Argentine Patagonia. He is a teacher of secondary education in the vocational technical modality. He has done service learning projects with us. He has a track record also as an institutional representative of a technical school in the south, and he's going to share with us the experience of his institution. You have 15 minutes, Roberto. It is so difficult to be up here. And I was thinking that I could picture a classroom. Who is absent? Arana is absent, I think. What happened to Arana? His aunt died due to COVID. Some other student is absent. Why don't you turn on your camera? Well, my camera is not working. My data plan is about to expire. I only have one mobile phone, and there are 4 siblings here in this home. So what can we say about the pandemic? What have we been left by the pandemic? Just the possibility to revisit our practices. When I introduce myself, I usually say that I'm not Roberto. I'm a member of a community in Junín de los Andes in the south of Argentina. I'm sorry that I apologize to colleagues from other parts of the world. This is the province of Neuquén in Argentina. Junín de los Andes is the location I come from. This is my hometown. I have been working for more than 20 years in service learning activities. Oftentimes, we didn't realize that we were doing service learning. And I learned about that over time. Fernandez is late. Why did you turn on your camera late? I want to see your face. And what about the face mask? The face masks don't let us see the smiles or the angry faces of others or the signs that they were not understanding what I was explaining to them. And they wanted to raise their hands to speak, but they couldn't. So, reshaping the classroom. In our understanding, the classroom is something that we know well, but there are some other possible classrooms. My colleagues make this possible, and that is the territory. We speak so much about the territory. In Neuquén, we are about to implement a curriculum design, and we hope that that will actually take place. So I can talk about a lot of projects carried out in the school. We have two specialties, a technical degree in food sciences and another one on mechanical technicians. And we work with other communities. We also had newsletters and virtual diaries during the pandemic. We also try to have fun, always wearing our face masks, always protecting ourselves. Greatness in action. In all these projects, we see service learning focused on inclusion, human rights, intercultural elements, gender, and environment. That is so important to us. The fair distribution of knowledge is important. As teachers, we are trying to make sure that we have fair distribution of knowledge. As the previous panelist said, let's look into the eyes. And I'm going to double the bet here and say, let's observe. Because sometimes if we just look, we tend to naturalize what we see. When we observe, probably we can think about something collectively in order to change the injustices that we observe, not looking at. Thank you for giving me that cue. Students as leaders of the experiences, they use the knowledge as a tool to fight in order to have an intervention in the community and effect a social transformation. Because communities learn from us, but they also teach us. And as Alvaro said, there is a horizontal line that has to do with solidarity and with intentionality of our teaching acts. Our projects are not institutionalized. I cannot lie to you. I could say that we are the panacea of the south of the country, but that is not the case. We have leadership teams that had to do a lot of work, a lot of hard work, teachers that didn't know how, students that didn't know how to connect, and teachers that didn't know how to set up a virtual classroom. And the pandemic revealed many flaws, many difficulties, and we were punished by the pandemic. And now we are fewer than we used to be before the pandemic. So, humanizing the practice. A retired colleague told me about this in the panel with the Uruguayan colleagues. We were just discussing that now there are fewer of us, and we have a lot of work to do. And it is so good to be able to know the education systems in other places and to replicate what they are doing without knowing that you are doing service learning. And it is so good to get recognized for that. So, recalculating the new classrooms, the teaching practices of digital media with possible access points. Tedesco said 10 years ago that scientific and digital education are today, in the 21st century, citizenship education. We can have a student or a teacher work without having connection. We talk about hybrid systems. We talk a lot at a theoretical level, but in the territory, the helpers of the school would walk a lot to give the sheets of paper, the pages, to the students one by one. I don't know how much time I have left, Kike. 4 minutes, or that's a lot. Galeano used to say that a Spanish journalist was conducting an interview, and he told him, whenever I see you, you have an eye using a telescope and the other eye using a microscope. I still remember that image. And I was thinking, well, that's such a good exercise to keep one eye on a telescope to see the macro image and another eye on the microscope in order to see things at a micro level and realize that things are not like that. They are in a certain state and they can be changed. You can upload now if you want. I'm sure that there are a lot of people in my hometown that are looking at me, so I'm going to send my greetings to them. A little bit of marketing doesn't hurt anyone. So I would like to say that it's an honor for me to be here. And let me present here an exercise for all the panelists and the audience. I'll try to be quick. Close your eyes. Just close your eyes for a minute. Please don't cheat, because I see that you are keeping your eyes open. So close your eyes. Let's picture a cave in the middle of a mountain. Roberto, I see that your eyes are still open. Imagine a cave in the middle of the mountain. There are chairs like the ones we have here. The only difference is that each of you are tied up. You can see. Imagine, don't lie to me. You cannot look to the sides. You cannot look back. You can only look forward. So don't open your eyes yet. But in the cave, imagine that you are opening your eyes and that you see someone saying and writing on the walls of the mountain the supposed truths of reality. One of you is more rebellious and gets free of those chains, of those ties, and can go out and see reality and look at reality and come back to the cave and tell the rest. The person who told us that lied to us. There are things that are not like he described, and others they are. But in general, he lied. So I'm going to ask all the people who are listening to me through the social media and all of you here present in the audience to think, what would you like better? Let us not turn our classrooms into caves. Now you can open your eyes and we can see one another again. So, in conclusion, one morning, and this is going to be very quick, one morning, Christian wakes up with a voice saying, the postman, and Christian received this letter to a student called Christian that says, the Institute of Technology in Massachusetts, blah, 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 is giving your name to a planet. The planet number 31398, that is now called Christian Polisi, a student of our school. So, what did Christian do to deserve that a planet be named after him? Nothing. He just did service learning with people working in the area that only have their animals as a livelihood, and they needed a vertical turbine that was very expensive in the market. We could put it together at a much cheaper cost. All the teachers that could helped, not everyone, but all the ones that wanted to help and could helped. We have to make this institutional. We have to institutionalize this. And for that, all of us need to make a contribution with a grain of sand so that we can create a desert. So, it turns out that the father would always say to Christian, come on, you cannot have a planet named after you. So, that person, that farmer, could have electricity at home because of that vertical turbine made by the students, and he was able to have electricity and a better living standard, and was able to come closer to the paradigm of the good living. So let's rethink our practices. Secondly, we are fewer than we used to be. Thirdly, always think about inequalities, about promoting human rights, about promoting interculturality, gender perspective, always. Thank you so much. Thank you, Roberto. All right, now I'm going to ask Claudia to join us here. I'm going to switch chairs here. While Olia is finding her place here, and Claudia will join us for the translation. Oila Mikhaili, I hope I am pronouncing the name correctly, is a graduate from Lviv University. She has a degree in law. She has been working for 16 years as a legal advisor in different governmental bodies, private companies, and banks. Since 2019, she has been working at the Ukraine Catholic University in different roles, but always as the head of the Service Learning Center. Since 2021, she has been participating in the Catholic Universities program of the Notre Dame University in the United States, and since April of this year, she joined the service learning team in the Ciudad Catholic University. We have already mentioned her several times because she comes from the Ukraine, and it's a very difficult time for her country. So thank you for being here, and you have the floor.
Thank you. I like your name. My name is very easy for Spanish-speaking people because it sounds like hello. Es muy fácil de pronunciar para la gente que habla español porque suena parecido a hola, ¿no? Olia.
So, the first thing I want to say to you is hola. I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to express my sincere gratitude to CLAYSS for organizing such a nice event, and to thank all of you to have the possibility to be with you today as well, and that you are here as well with me. Thank you.
Bueno, entonces, hola a todos. Quiero decirles que es un placer para mí estar aquí, expresar mi gratitud a CLAYSS por haber organizado este evento tan hermoso, y a todos por estar aquí.
So, my today's presentation will be a little bit about the history of implementing service learning in the Ukrainian Catholic University and overcoming the crises we have now.
Bueno, entonces en mi presentación hoy les voy a contar un poco la historia de la implementación del aprendizaje-servicio en mi universidad.
Previous one. Yeah. So, but first of all, several words about where am I from and about my university as well. So, I'm from the city that has 800 years of history. It stayed at the same place, but it belonged to different countries through all that history. And that is why we have quite colorful, and we are considered to be a cultural capital of Ukraine.
Bueno, primero un poquito de dónde estamos, en la ciudad de Lviv. Somos una ciudad que tiene 800 años de antigüedad. Fuimos a lo largo de la historia perteneciendo a distintos países, y se nos considera, debido a esta diversidad cultural, se nos considera la capital cultural de Ucrania.
But probably one of the reasons of it is because we have 15 universities in a city that's up to 1 million of inhabitants.
Y también porque tenemos 15 universidades, que es un gran número considerando la cantidad de habitantes.
And as for my university, I would describe it in three phrases. First of all, it's a new university, but with about 100 prehistory. Because as we are now, we were founded 20 years ago, but we inherited the experience of Lviv Theological Academy that was created at the beginning of the 20th century, but was unfortunately prohibited during a Soviet period.
¿Se le escucha bien? ¿Tiene el micrófono? Okay. Bueno, quería contarles un poquito mi universidad. Mi universidad es una universidad bastante nueva, pero heredamos el legado de la academia anterior.
Okay. So the second phrase is that we provide best professors for best students, and it's really so because, you know, this year, as several years previous as well, we topped the rating, all Ukrainian rating of the universities at the, according to the criteria as the highest competitive score for submitted application for bachelor programs. So we really have the best students.
También decimos que tenemos los mejores profesores para los mejores estudiantes. De hecho, encabezamos el ranking de universidades y la cantidad de postulantes para nuestros estudios de grado, así que decimos que contamos con los mejores estudiantes.
And the sad thing, and the last for today, I could speak about it for long, but the last for today is that we are a small university, comparatively small, but with a great mission, because we are the first one and so far the only one Catholic university through all the territory of former Soviet Union.
Perdón, pero tengo mucho eco acá al lado. No le puedo, sí. Okay. Bueno, decía que en realidad somos una universidad pequeña para la gran cantidad de estudiantes que tenemos, eso nos llena de orgullo.
You know, here you can see our one of the main mottos, that is witnessing, servicing, and communicating. In Ukrainian, all these three words are starting with the same letter, so we call it a formula of 3S.
Este es nuestro lema, el que pueden ver en pantalla, es ser testigos, dar un servicio y comunicar. En ucraniano, estas tres expresiones empiezan con S, así que las llamamos las tres S's.
But it only the part of the formula, the second part is 2M. It matches with English because it's martyrs and marginalized. So.
The martyrs and marginalized?
Those who suffer for the religion, martyrs,
yes, and the ends, it's
marginalized.
Right, but what you said in English, it's
the same like in Ukrainian.
Right. Y también tenemos el lema de los que nos dedicamos a los mártires y los marginalizados, que bueno, tanto en ucraniano como en inglés empiezan con la misma letra, las dos M's.
So as you see from the very beginning of our existing, this formula of 3S and 2M's is not only our vision or our perspective, is already the base of all our activities.
Entonces, estas tres S's y esas dos M's constituyen la base de todas nuestras actividades.
So now I'll speak a little bit about our road in service learning. The idea of implementing of service learning as we see it now was 5 or 6 years before, and you know, we created a working group for implementing it and started promoted within the university.
Bueno, ahora en cuanto a nuestro trayecto, nuestra trayectoria con el aprendizaje-servicio, empezamos hace unos 5 años con esta idea del aprendizaje-servicio, con la creación de grupos de trabajo y la promoción del aprendizaje-servicio en la comunidad de nuestra universidad.
Our next big step was to including service learning to our strategy, 5-year strategy. And actually, it's the first point of our strategy. And we also started with pilot projects. We elaborated methodological recommendations for teachers. And we established like a month of service learning. This is November. And we tried to do all the most popular and significant events on service learning in this month.
Luego desarrollamos una estrategia a 5 años dentro de la universidad. Creamos un proyecto piloto, definimos la metodología que los profesores tenían que aplicar y creamos también el mes del aprendizaje-servicio, donde llevamos a cabo muchos eventos y actividades relacionadas con el tema.
The next big step was for sure to joining Universidad community.
Y por supuesto luego nos unimos a la comunidad de Uniservitate.
That give us a lot of knowledge, a lot of possibility for systematic work, and a lot of support.
Y esto nos dio mucho conocimiento, mucho trabajo sistemático y mucho apoyo.
We also created a Center for Service Learning, which I am heading.
También creamos el Departamento de Aprendizaje y Servicio que yo dirijo.
I will just make a little stop on this road because I want to explain you that in our strategic goal, we have wrote that each student of each bachelor program during his studies takes part in at least 3 or 4 quality educational courses based on service learning.
Y para esto definimos un objetivo estratégico, lo pueden ver en la pantalla, que es que cada estudiante en cada programa de licenciatura tiene que participar en por lo menos 3-4 cursos de calidad relacionados con aprendizaje y servicio.
And to make this goal more measurable, we choose the number of 44 because we have 11 bachelor programs, and to reach it till the end of 2025.
Can you repeat that? Yeah, we can repeat it to them.
44. So we choose 44 programs need to be elaborated till the end of 2025.
Entonces, en este plan a 5 años, definimos que 44 programas se tienen que ir cumplimentando hasta fines de 2025. Ese es el programa quinquenal.
And you see as this diagram, we were quite successful because we are reaching almost 40% of our goal, and we have still 3 years before in future.
Y como pueden ver en el gráfico, fuimos bastante exitosos porque ya alcanzamos el 40% de ese objetivo. Allí ven el avance.
But just not to speak only in numbers, I would like to to describe you a little bit in which direction we are moving. One of them is support of parishes. We decided to choose certain parishes that are quite remoted or they need to support, and at the first stage to provide diagnosis of their needs, and the other stage, the second stage, to create as much service learning project as they need to try to elaborate to solve the problems.
Y bueno, para no hablar tanto de números, pero hablar un poquito de en qué dirección estamos avanzando, bueno, desarrollamos distintos proyectos, esos son los planes que tenemos, como el desarrollo de parroquias, el trabajo con estudiantes y profesores en distintos proyectos.
We also want to step out of the university and to share our experience to other educational institutions, and we choose secondary schools like the first step for that.
También queremos salir de la universidad y trabajar con otros aliados. Por eso decidimos, el primer paso es involucrar a escuelas secundarias, salir de la universidad y trabajar con ellas.
And of course, we do our everyday work in supporting our teachers and students, providing them consultments or trainings or fundraising issues, administrative issues. That is actually everyday our activity of the center.
Y tratamos de involucrar a los estudiantes en el trabajo diario, hacemos actividades de recaudación de fondos y diversas actividades para involucrarlos.
And actually, dissemination of our experience is also very useful because we want, we are a small university, and that is why we are more flexible. But we have big universities that they are not Catholics, but still they can replicate our experience, and we will be just happy if they do.
Y como dije, somos una universidad relativamente pequeña, esto hace que podamos ser bastante flexibles, y hay otras universidades que no son católicas que tienen un poco más de dificultades. Nos gustaría que pudieran replicar lo que nosotros estamos haciendo.
But unfortunately, not all our plans were fulfilled. And I would like that my experience I will share with you now will be not useful for you ever.
Bueno, a mí me gustaría, como dije, que esta experiencia que yo estoy contando aquí pueda ser útil para otros en otros lugares.
But unfortunately, we live in the world, and if I'm not mistaken, there is about 20 wars now ongoing.
Pero lamentablemente comenzó la guerra, lamentablemente, perdón. Sí, es un eco tremendo el que tengo acá al lado, perdón. Sí, bueno, ella está comentando que, lo que dijo recién es que ahora están en una situación de guerra que espera que eso que están experimentando ellos no se repita en otros lugares y que en este momento en el mundo, de hecho, hay 20 guerras en curso en distintas partes del mundo.
And actually, we need to state that our beautiful world is also a world of crises.
Y debo decir que nuestro hermoso mundo también es un mundo de tragedias y de crisis.
But what is war in the eyes of service learning? And here you can see 3 challenges. There was a lot of them, but I choose to make direct influence on service learning.
Bueno, como sabemos, es muy importante la influencia que puede tener el aprendizaje-servicio en estas circunstancias tan difíciles.
First of all, it's a sudden and rapid growth of society requests, because the requests that normally doesn't exist in society, they just rapidly increased, like humanitarian needs or something like that.
Perdón, can you say that again? Perdón,
Sí, no. Sudden and rapid increase of requests.
The request from the
Yeah.
society. Request,
If you
okay.
see.
Sí, esta guerra que se desató en el mundo también hizo que crecieran muchísimo más los reclamos que está haciendo la sociedad.
And unfortunately, there was noticed a decreased motivation to study for students because they want to be useful. And we have 2 weeks like vacation when the war started, but we decided that there could be no vacation during war, and just our students for 2 weeks, they were all volunteering. But later we need to come them back to the auditoria.
Justamente el inicio de la guerra comenzó con el periodo de vacaciones, un periodo de 2 semanas de vacaciones escolares o académicas. Pero esto no impidió que los alumnos mostraran esta gran necesidad de hacer trabajos como de voluntarios. Todos quisieron participar y muy pronto se volvió a las aulas.
And the sad challenge I would like to emphasize, it was increasing information flows, including fake news and enemy propaganda. When something happens, you just start reading everything, and not everybody has the emotional potential to make like filters of information they perceive.
También hubo un gran aumento de la información. Esto incluyó muchas noticias falsas, muchas fake news, propaganda enemiga, y la situación emocional en la que se encontraba la gente impedía que usaran un filtro para determinar qué es lo que era información verdadera o no.
But it would not be our university if we don't try to solve these challenges.
Pero bueno, la universidad sola no puede resolver todos estos desafíos.
As for if we speak about service learning, and when there is a sudden and rapid increase of demands, formally you do not have a lot of time for reflection and diagnosis. And for example, we have a project of shelters that we hosted in one of our buildings. So it wasn't time to make any statistical something research. We just know that our city is overcrowded, and every day from 5 till 10% of inhabitants, the quantity of people, there is between 5 and 10% of inhabitants coming daily to our city.
Este no fue el momento de la guerra, no fue un momento de reflexión, no hubo tiempo para hacer mucha investigación. Además veíamos un gran flujo de personas que venían a la ciudad a diario, un 5 o 10% de personas que venían a nuestra ciudad.
So from the methodological point of view, probably we are not so polite according to service learning.
Así que desde el punto de vista de la productividad del aprendizaje-servicio no pudimos ser tan productivos en esta etapa.
But as for decreasing of motivation, you know, during these 2 weeks of vacation, let us call them, actually actively volunteering, some of our students joined to army forces, and you know, all others just were stressed and they wanted to be useful, and they was not concentrated to education. And actually service learning became a resolvence, because service learning became a motivation itself. That was a tool that helped us to keep students in auditoria, because if you want to be useful, you can be useful while learning as well.
Bueno, como les dije, tuvimos este periodo de 2 semanas de vacaciones y ahí bajó un poquito la motivación para estudiar. De hecho, muchos de los estudiantes se ofrecieron como voluntarios para las Fuerzas Armadas, pero a través de esto el aprendizaje de servicio también se convirtió en una motivación en sí mismo. Todos querían ser útiles y esta era la forma que encontraban para hacerlo.
And trying to resolve the problem of increasing information flows, actually the result is that 30%, that is actually every third courses of journalism and social media was transferred to service learning courses.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Perdón, pero quiero decir exactamente lo que ella quiere decir.
So yes, because we met a problem of a lot of information that was not so fake news and so on and so forth, and we have a school of journalism, so 30% of courses of School of Journalism and Social Media became service learning courses.
Okay. Gracias a este gran aumento en la cantidad de información que estaba circulando, muchos cursos en la Escuela de Periodismo, de hecho el 30% de los cursos de la Escuela de Periodismo se convirtieron en cursos de aprendizaje-servicio.
Because we both try to produce a good information, I mean approved information from one side and from the other side, to understand how information is looked not only in Ukraine, how it's looked from outside.
Esto nos aseguraba que realmente la información que se transmitiera fuera buena información, información aprobada, y que se pudiera entender así, no solo dentro de Ucrania, sino también que fuera de Ucrania se recibiera buena información.
So in such we experience a transformation of service learning. If previously it mostly we take a course, theoretical course, and decided how we can make it more practical, more service learning. So after the war started, service was the base of creating the projects. So the demand of society became the base for us to decide to which courses we can join this request to make service learning course.
O sea que a través de esto el aprendizaje de servicio realmente atravesó una transformación. Se convirtió de algo que era mayormente teórico, basado en el aprendizaje, y después de ahí ver qué servicios se podían realizar. Bueno, la guerra dio vuelta a esta ecuación y realmente fue el servicio que surgió de los reclamos, las demandas de la sociedad, y después ver, bueno, en qué cursos pueden encajar estos servicios.
And do you remember our roads? It was at the very beginning. We are still ongoing. We didn't stop. And now we can say that service learning for us is probably the most valuable studying approach.
Bueno, este es el mismo gráfico que les mostré al comienzo. Como ustedes recordarán, todavía seguimos en este trayecto y podemos decir que el aprendizaje de servicio es para nosotros el abordaje más efectivo y más valioso.
And I would like to announce that 2 of our projects won the Universidad Award 2022 within our hub.
Y quiero anunciar que 2 de nuestros proyectos ganaron el premio Uniservitate 2022 de nuestro nodo regional.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias.
So much support I feel here. Thank you.
Es tan lindo para nosotros estar aquí hoy.
And what is very good and very, symbolically, that within these two projects, one is directly connected with war, but one is not directly connected. It's absolutely not connected with war. That means that, you know, we can overwhelm difficulties and live furthermore.
Bueno, y de estos proyectos, uno está relacionado con la guerra, pero el otro no está relacionado con la guerra. Esto muestra que podemos superar las dificultades.
So we are now thinking about further development, and it probably sounds quite strange, but it's a traumatic but very great moment for development of service learning, because now everybody in our university understands what service learning is for.
Bueno, y a pesar de todo esto seguimos desarrollándonos y es extraño, si bien lo dramático de la situación, ahora podemos decir que todos entienden para qué es el aprendizaje servicio.
And now we can really state that all the UCU, we call it UCU, UCU, our university, became like a great service learning project, because I think that there is no students that try to support university and community outside in this period.
Así que ahora podemos decir que toda nuestra universidad, la UCU, como la llamamos, es todo un gran proyecto de aprendizaje-servicio y todos los estudiantes lo apoyan.
And I think it's great because when we win, we will lead a lot of working hands, hot hearts and kind hearts, and bright brains to rebuild our country.
Así que a través de esto todos podemos poner nuestras manos, nuestros corazones, nuestros cerebros para construir un mejor país.
And do you remember I started to speak a little bit about my city? I think that it's not surprising that for me it's the best city in the world. And I really suppose that one day it will be safe enough, and I will invite all of you. And if you even say, Ola, you wasn't wrong, it's not the best city in the world, I will be grateful to see you there.
Y bueno, por último, hablar de mi ciudad, que para mí es una de las mejores ciudades del mundo. Los invito a que vayan allí a ver qué les parece, pero para mí es una de las mejores.
So I really encourage you to visit our website and read more about every project and any activities that is now at our university. And thank you so much for being with me today.
Los invito a que visiten nuestro sitio web para que vean todas las actividades que estamos desarrollando en la universidad, y muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you so much, Ola. Muchísimas gracias, Ola. Gracias por nuestra interpretación también. Ahí. Le agradecemos a Claudia. Bueno, voy a dar paso a la última integrante de esta mesa, a la señora Selmira May. Ahí vamos, la vamos acomodando. Mientras acomoda Selmira, les cuento que ella es formada en ciencias en la UDELAR de Uruguay, hizo estudios de posgrados en el Reino Unido y en los Estados Unidos. Durante más de 20 años ha trabajado para la Oficina Regional para las Ciencias de América Latina y el Caribe, siendo responsable de desarrollo y ejecución de diversas iniciativas de la UNESCO. Ha trabajado en la ejecución e implementación de programas de educación y de formación de capacidades en el área de ciencia y tecnología, tanto a nivel global como regional. Y actualmente se encuentra a cargo del programa de educación en UNESCO Montevideo, centrando su trabajo en la innovación en la educación, la ciencia y la tecnología, la educación en ciencias, incluyendo educación en reducción de riesgos, mujeres en ciencia, entre otras temáticas relevantes de UNESCO. Selmira, te dejo tus 15 minutos y cualquier cosa yo te aviso, tranqui. Gracias.
Anda, lo debo prender.
Acá, es esto.
No.
Can you hear me? Good morning. It is a pleasure for me to be here in person. If I wear my glasses, I can't see you, so I'm taking them off. It is so nice to see such a large audience. Most of you don't know me, but anyway, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks to CLAYSS for inviting me to participate, and I want to thank the university for hosting this beautiful conference. and I have to walk a lot to get to this building because the university has several buildings. I feel shy or humble to speak after all the wonderful speakers we had in this panel. I wish I were the first one and not the last one to take the floor here, especially with our colleague from the Ukraine, because we know that the value of her presence in Civis increase in tenfold or 1,000 times, because when we see what the situation they are going through, we can see that whenever there is the will, people willing to do things, we can still transform lives. So now I have spent a lot of my time making these few remarks, but let me go back to my presentation. UNESCO is promoting what we call the futures of education. As you may know, UNESCO over the years, and this is here that this is where I reveal my age. UNESCO issued some documents on prospects. It asked the opinion of experts, former ministers, to tell them how they envisage education many years ago. So a fourth commission report was launched talking about the focus of education that was learning by doing. That is quite an extensive document. If you're interested, you can read it. But it put students at the center of education, and that is why it was so important. In the 1990s, another report was released, what I consider to be a jewel, with the support of UNESCO. That is a report called that education encloses a treasure. That is to learning by doing, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to learn. Roberto is helping me now with all these phrases. So I think that we are always going back to the humanist view of education that places students at the center. And 25 years later, because figures and evidence point in this direction, we know that we are not going in the right direction. We are not seeing the results that we expected. At the United Nations, we speak about a serious educational crisis. So now UNESCO thinks about the futures of education, not just one single future, but different possible futures. Once again, this is a document put together by experts with a lot of inputs from different stakeholders, youth, different countries in the world, talking about this, trying to figure out where the future of education lies. We know that these inputs are painful, but also they belong to the period before the pandemic. So probably all these figures that you see here that are so painful to read are no longer up to date, and perhaps today they are more alarming because we have already gone through the pandemic. I need to put my glasses on, but apologies for that. So, in this report, UNESCO calls upon establishing a new social pact, a new social contract. Why? Because we understand that education is not owned by teachers, it's not owned by education systems, it's not owned by people like Selmira who sits in an office. It is about a social commitment. It is not enough for educational systems to do everything on their own. So this means that all of us need to get involved, communities, teachers, schools, those that make up the backbone of education, but perhaps are not necessarily part of the educational system. So UNESCO wonders what are the differences between what is being said now and what we used to say. So it comes to this reflection. There are certain items identified as necessary. New pedagogies that are caring and cooperative, and I think that this is really relevant to your own discussions these days. Earlier you were talking about curricula and content. They should be common, they should be relevant. The teaching profession, teachers that are more caring, more collaborative. I think that during the pandemic, many of us realized that teachers were quite isolated, and many of them successfully established collaboration networks. And we are very proud of that, but actually we did not help them establish those networks. It was the teachers themselves that went out to establish those networks. So hopefully that will be one of the wins, so to speak, of the pandemic. One of the big lessons learned, how we can continue providing support to our teachers so that they won't feel alone in what they are doing. Schools that should be increasingly inclusive, healthy, giving a new meaning to the idea of healthy and safe schools. Schools where our students can continue to learn as they need. Because the pandemic has also shown to us that the school is fundamental for the learning process of students and for quality learning. And learning doesn't take place only at school. Learning happens throughout our entire life. I was telling Roberto, when I sit here, I am learning, and this is a learning space. I'm learning a lot from all of you. I am diverting my talk. Well, I will run out of time. So here we talk about new challenges ahead. We were talking about learning to do, that individuals have to learn how to live with others. But individuals today have to do something else. Today you didn't talk too much about the planet, but it is true. Today we have environmental challenges that force us to make decisions and to revisit the way we live, the way we consume, the way we interact with the environment, because it is a matter of sustainability of human life. So that challenges us as a society and also as educational systems. The impairment of democratic governance, the increase in political conflicts, and even going beyond the political level. We can also talk about conflicts at the regional level or at the international level. Digital technologies, that they are here to stay, we all know that. We know that they open up opportunities, but they also raise many challenges. That's all I was saying. The boom of fake news is part of this new coexistence that now we have through technology. We were talking about collaboration among teachers. Many networks have been established online. So technology has this dual role. The challenge of creating decent and humanized jobs. I was given 5 additional minutes for a reflection, but let me anticipate this right now. When was education dehumanized? When did we lose our north? What do we have to do in education? The mere idea of thinking that we have to humanize something that is already inherently human makes me feel scared. And then things that have to do with caring, that have to do with more emerging circumstances and the possibilities of developing ourselves. What do we want to achieve with this social contract? Of course, to guarantee the right to education for a lifetime. This is constantly repeated because it is so important. And strengthening education as a common public asset. regardless of all the different options, education has to be a public asset. It has to take place in the public sphere. Nobody should be left behind, like the agenda, 2030 agenda claims. No one can be left behind. And those that are being left behind are the ones that need our help the most. We talked a lot about inclusion. I'm going to say this now, but I always say that we will stop talking about inclusion once we understand that the richness lies in diversity. The day we understand that all of us are different, that day we will understand that that makes us rich, and we will stop talking about inclusion. By no means should that give us the idea that we can exclude someone because that someone is different. I think that that day, if that day comes, we will understand the true meaning of inclusion. And I would like to share with you some proposals. All the things that I'm saying here are specified in a document, but that is why I'm just talking about so many different ideas here. You can read the document if you want more information, but let me bring you more to these few comments. I have already mentioned this, but we need to change the way in which we see and we live with pedagogy. I think that this is what embraces service learning. Since I have only 2 minutes left, I'm not going to read all these to you, but I may just say that we need to work for the benefit of global solidarity and international cooperation. Sometimes I say that I feel embarrassed to listen to myself talking about this when you are actually the ones who are doing the work. But when we talk about the futures of education so explicitly in a document like this, you will see that I have highlighted 3 items here. So, how can we benefit from service learning? Perhaps this goes beyond what you have said, because I always say that organizations, teachers who are working in the ground, in the field, sometimes lose sight of the big contribution that you are making at a larger scale. And we are the ones who are responsible for giving you that general picture, that umbrella, because what you do is really valuable. So service learning and community engagement soften the walls that separate the classroom from the community. Perhaps this is something obvious in practice and you don't reflect on this, but this enables our students to connect with what is happening outside the walls of the school. We cannot leave anyone behind. This cannot be done just by a few. This has to be done by all, and we cannot do it in a group for a certain group. We have to do it for everyone. So, during the coffee break, I was speaking with Gabriela. I don't know where she is, but she is a colleague that we share with CLAYSS, and we were talking about how to connect action with teaching. How can we educate students and citizens ultimately for the world? And how can we make sure that they will be caring, they will be empathic, because they have to have empathy, they have to practice solidarity, they have to know how to work with others. This is the right way of doing it, like what you are doing. Sometimes people say, and how do you teach the soft skills like this with what you're doing? I think that that is the key. Perhaps it's difficult to visualize that when you are doing it. I'm being told that my time is up, so anyway, you will have access to this presentation, so don't worry, you can read this on your own. But this is a summary of what I was telling you about. How can we produce ethical, caring, understanding citizens, and how can we assess that? How can we evaluate that? How evaluation needs to check whether we are really fulfilling our purpose. So since I only have a couple of additional minutes, I'm going to stop now with this presentation. Thank you all. This presentation will be made available to you. Now I change hats, and now I will fulfill the role of a commentator. So once again, I think that what matters here is the work that you are doing. I was sitting in the audience and I was listening to the presentations, and I thought, what can we do? And I say we because this also applies to UNESCO. What can we do to extend service learning to others and to other places? Because I see there are a lot of initiatives, a lot of efforts that we need to capitalize on. Sometimes you talked about the law in Argentina that sets certain requirements for university. How can we introduce this in mandatory education? So we need to sit down and think what we can do in that regard. In this document on the futures of education, we talk about how can we work on all these aspects already from a very early age and kindergarten, during the first few years of life, and onwards, because this is not just a matter of getting universities involved alone. Of course, they have to be engaged, but with others. Then research, of course, in universities. These are some things that I have already mentioned. What are the consequences of crises and emergencies, and how much teaching will we have to do in situations of crisis or emergencies or of uncertainty? We have a beautiful session on uncertainty and critical situations in relation to learning. For us, in Latin America, that was something that we saw at a distance. Today, we have all sitting next to us. We have experienced a pandemic in the world. So today, we need to think that we need to prepare our students to become citizens that will be able to live through uncertain times. And then the consistency aspect. Service learning in practice combines perfectly well the pedagogy and didactics. How can we teach the 2030 agenda? And 4.7, that is my favorite goal in SDG 4. Well, I invite you to read that goal because it refers to this. I have said many things already. I saw a phrase that I really like. We want to produce students that are responsible citizens, capable of fulfilling expectations. And today I was thinking about that, and I thought that that is quite selfish. We need to have citizens who are aware of their own rights and the rights of others. This includes thinking about an environment that will endure the test of time. We need to be more caring, we need to be more cooperative. So I promise that for my next presentation, I'm going to rewrite that phrase and I will use it in all my presentations. Thank you so much, Salmira. All right, we are about to close this panel. It has been a luxury for us to have all these speakers with Roberto, who talked about the document that they put together, and he talked about the needs felt by the territories and the communities, not the needs that we identified ourselves. And this connects to what Ola said. Ola talked about the need for service was raised by the community itself, and we took the educational path. But in the most difficult context, they didn't give up. So this is what makes service learning so strong as a pedagogical proposal. She said that the UCU became a service learning project, and they received recognition for the work they did during the war, but also for a project that started before the war. So this shows the continuity of institutionalization. Roberto reminded us of the way that millions of students lived over these 2 years of the pandemic, and how much work still needs to be done in order to bridge the gaps. Selmira was just asked to give us a hand, but she gave us her whole arm, because it is always so good to listen to comments from someone who is not in our own area of work. So she joined us and she talked about the previous crises that already existed before the pandemic, that were exacerbated by the pandemic. She talked about the documents of UNESCO, and yesterday we also talked about service learning and how UNESCO has picked up part of our work in its documents. So we are thrilled to see that. In the morning, we saw the examples of the UVA. We also saw what happened in the secondary school in Mexico. It is the system itself that is picking up what is coming from the grassroots, and it is even better when it comes from with a top-down approach, understanding what is happening in the system. So we still have some challenges ahead to revisit our schools and universities, and we know that service learning is not the only tool. We don't think it is necessarily, but we know that it is the key to connect good learning with the resolution of concrete problems and the education of citizens that will build a better world. So now, before moving to lunch, we will have some more announcements. Once again, I want to thank the panelists. It has been quite a morning, right? Very intense morning, right? We are almost like the banner here, you know, that is going crazy. Maybe it's because of the time of the day, because now we need some energy. But please bear with us for a few more minutes. I'm sure that the banner and us will be in good shape after lunch once again. Before the lunch break, let me share with you some important information. First, at 2:15 we will start with the breakout sessions until 4:45 on the first and second floor of this building. In particular, we invite the students to get together to start their own meeting. And as we said earlier, we'll ask you to be here on time. I know that we also have panelists that will be presenting in the afternoon session, so you need to meet your moderators at 2 p.m. at the door of the classroom that you have been assigned. On the screen, you will be able to see the different breakout sessions that will take place in the afternoon. And once again, we remind you that we have registrations open for our courses in CLAYSS. And finally, I'll give the floor to Maria Rosa, coordinator of the Universidad program, because she has some announcements to make. Thank you. I just wanted to add a comment by way of closing the presentation that you listened to. Some of you are aware of the Universidad program. We are working in different regions to promote service learning. So after this panel, I wanted to highlight the support that we have received from the Central and Eastern Europe region and the Middle East region with the Instant University and the John Paul II University in Poland and the Bethlehem Catholic University from Palestine, because they have been providing a lot of support to the Ukraine Catholic University. Ola today is working for the Eichstätt Catholic University, and through the university where she's participating in a course that we offer from CLAYSS. So I think these are good examples of what we can do through service learning to deal with crisis in terms of expressing our fraternity and solidarity in concrete action. So a special show of hands for the team of the Einstein Catholic University and all the regional hub members. Please stand up, and I would like to ask all the Universidad members to come here to stay at the front in order to take a group photo. Thank you. We'll resume our sessions at 2:15, and at 5 we will start with a closing session for the conference. Thank you. Enjoy lunch and get some rest.